Sorry about that, guys. The video got cut off, so I went off talking, I think, for another few minutes, and we weren't able to get it. So here's just kind of a part two, but just kind of saying the saying what I said that didn't get recorded. Just to rehash, I got my black belt in about 4.5 years. I started my training in Japan, and then I got my black belt from Marcos Torregrosa, who has Yamaso BJJ in Sacramento. And now I have my academy in El Dorado Hills. Here it is, El Dorado Hills Jiu Jitsu. Um, so a lot of credit to having just great instructors, guys who didn't hold anything back and were willing to share information to help me become better and maybe even better than they are. And I really appreciate them for them sharing without any hesitation, without holding anything back. It's really unique to find somebody like that, I think, because or find instructors that want you to really get better. Some might actually say that, but very few, I think, actually want that to happen. And so within the practices, there was a lot of within from those instructors. Something that I got was the idea of recollection and retention. The need to recall information, the need to recall the technique or strategy involved with jiu-jitsu, and also retention, the need to drill the technique with repetition, the need to drill it, multiple times, not just 10 or 20 times and moving on to the next technique, but for 30 minutes to an hour at a time for maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and to make that technique not just something you know, but something your body understands. Some people refer to that as muscle memory. And where we got cut off, I kind of started talking about visualization. Visualization was something that I did in between classes to help me, and these are all things that I did at the time, or during the 4.5 years of me doing jiu-jitsu, that I think contributed in a positive way to me getting my black belt in 4.5 years. Some may have influenced that progress more quicker than others. I don't know, but I think it's things that you guys can take into your own daily practice, and if it works for you, then use it, and hopefully it helps expedite your learning process, helps you learn things relatively quickly, not just in jiu-jitsu, but maybe school or any other art form or science, anything. Anyways, so visualization, revisiting the material. I would go over the technique that we covered in class, mentally. I would relax, close my eyes. At the time I was commuting to school or commuting to the dojo through train, and I'd walk a little bit, and during that time I would just recall the technique that we had practiced, and it was very simple. I would go step by step. It wasn't like sometimes it was a first person where I was doing the technique, sometimes it was a third person where I was watching 2 people doing the technique. It really depended. It didn't matter so much. What was important was that I was revisiting the technique, and I was able to recall exact details, where my hands went, how I needed to move my hips, and how I needed to move my legs, where I started and where I ended up. That was the most important details that I needed to do. It didn't matter if it was first person or third person. Excuse me. So that visualization was a big step. It was a big thing that I think helped me retain the material, and it was also something that helped me recall the material. When we would warm up every few weeks on a Friday, my instructor Marcos and Michelle would ask, "Do you guys remember everything?" And at first I thought he was joking, but I soon realized he was being serious. He really wanted us to remember everything, and that was important. It was important that we could remember everything that was being taught, because they wouldn't teach anything if it wasn't important. It wasn't just like learning some things. Everything was important, so we needed to remember everything. And if we forgot something, we needed to practice it again. Um, and I thought that was really interesting. It made me approach training with a little more intent, with a little more focus, because it reinforced the value of classes. You know, if your instructor thinks that you should be remembering every single thing that they teach you, um, you're going to try a little bit harder to remember that. They weren't interested in doing busy work or just teaching us, you know, some technique that they saw on video. They really wanted us to learn the techniques, the details, everything that they taught. They expected us to remember and to learn, and they also expected us to forget it. So they included time to ask questions, to recall the material, and to practice it again. And I thought that was really valuable, and I think the visualization that I did complemented that training, that teaching philosophy. Something else that I did really made an intent to do, because I had wrestled for so long. You know, once I figured out Jiu Jitsu, it would have been really easy for me to not try any of the new techniques and just do what I felt most comfortable with, which was wrestling. So, but I didn't want to do that. To me, my goal or my objective wasn't to beat somebody, but more to learn new things, to learn a new skill, to learn a new submission, and be able to apply that submission. So my training sessions, and this was something that I just started doing on my own, was my training sessions. For me, it was important that I did the technique that we had learned that day, and while I was doing that technique, as much as I could, I wouldn't use my strength. I wouldn't go too fast. I always tried to go at the speed that my partner was going, and to match their strength, because for the most part, I'm a 200-pound guy. I was bigger than most and stronger than most people. I'm a 200-pound guy who's been doing sports for a few years. And I didn't want the technique to work because I was going faster than somebody, or I was out muscling them or using my strength against them. I wanted it to work because the technique was what it was, and I believed in that technique. And I think that was a big contribution to me learning the techniques, learning technique quicker than most people. You know, they knew what technique I was trying to do because it was technique that we had just practiced that day, but I was still able to do it. And sometimes I wasn't able to do it, and that was feedback as well. And you know, I could take I could see why it wasn't working, or I could analyze what wasn't working about it, and I could take that and figure something else out, figure out a complementary move, or move my hips in a different way if I was playing a guard, or you know, change the direction, change the way I was giving my pressure. And that seemed to be a really helpful process, a helpful way for me to learn the technique, and for me to like make the technique my own thing, rather than just something that we had covered that day and move on to sparring or move on to our rolling. And most of the time, the technique that we covered in a week, we would revisit that technique again and again, and we would figure out, you know, kind of a secondary or tertiary, like a third attack that went with the first technique, right? So an action-reaction type of game, that allowed me to add, you know, because they would do this and I wouldn't know what to do on Monday, but the next day we had learned the technique based on the counter. So now I had the counter to that counter, and I was able to use that technique. So sometimes I was getting stopped, but I was cognizant of the fact that I was being stopped, and I was able to add new techniques to that skill, knowing that, okay, if the first thing doesn't work, I can go to the next attack, and if the next attack doesn't work, I could maybe even go back to the first attack. And that was really valuable, knowing and realizing that, having been taught that was really valuable. So we talked about just kind of me being really lucky and having great instructors, my visualization, and then the third thing that I was doing was just really emphasizing using the technique, going back to using that technique. Just like I would visualize the technique, and that day I would try and use that technique. The day that we learned the technique, I would try and use the technique, but not just to use it, but use it with the speed that matched how fast my partner was going, and then also with the strength that matched my partner's strength. So, and most of the time that meant I was going a little bit slower than I usually would have, or I would have, and I was going, trying to use as much less, weight, much less power than I would have had if I was wrestling or something. So that was that's the third part. Another thing that I think contributed to my quick learning was having fun. I always made sure that jiu-jitsu was, I would revisit the reasons why I started doing jiu-jitsu, which was to have fun, to have a hobby that I could do, something that was healthy, it contributed positively to my life, and at the end of the day, I was having fun with the people I was with. And that was a really important thing. Yeah, am I going to get serious when it comes down? Am I going to get focused? And am I going to take my training serious? Of course, I have a limited amount of time to train, and a limited amount of time to work and to be with my family. So it mattered that I took the time, that I take things serious. But that doesn't mean, just because you're being serious doesn't mean you're having fun with it. And I would revisit my approach and make sure that I was having fun with each training session, with each competition, and with each trip to go to and come back from a competition. It wasn't just serious business all the time. Having fun. So for example, my most recent trip to San Francisco, I had a one-match, like a one-match super fight type of thing, and around that I did some training. So we showed up on Friday, we had the weigh-ins. Saturday morning, did some training with Marcos, and then after that we went on a bay cruise around San Francisco, and then I came back to the Golden Gate Park, did a walk around the park. I actually did an episode of Map Mind, and then got ready, warmed up again, got ready for my match, came back, and had the match, went back to the hotel, spent the night, and then drove back with my family. So, not to mention the bay cruise, I did that with my family too. So it was there was a lot of fun mixed in, right? It wasn't just like, I'm gonna go to San Francisco, I'm gonna train in the morning, and then I'm gonna visualize, and then I'm gonna think about how I visualized. It was having fun, with where I am. It was a not a once in a life opportunity, but it's not every day you get to go to San Francisco. So I was really fortunate. I'm thankful that I get to have fun with jiu-jitsu, not just be so serious about it. And then I think that has also been kind of a big part of. There was a time in those 4.5 years where jiu-jitsu kind of became more serious than it needed to be, and I noticed myself not having fun. I noticed myself focused kind of on the wrong things rather than learning new things, expanding my philosophy, and understanding more about myself. So have fun. Make jiu-jitsu a fun part of your day, and you know, walk away from jiu-jitsu or walk away from your training knowing that you did your best. I think those are the kind of the main things that I mentally focused on in the 4.5 years that helped with my quick learning. One more thing that I think maybe had a big contribution was competition. I did a lot of competitions, and I didn't get into jiu-jitsu for the sake of competing, but I really enjoyed it. It was a fun outlet for me, and it gave me more direction in training. So I would go to a tournament and I would get beat. Let's say I got beat in a half guard, and so then I would go back to training and I would teach everybody the half guard, and I would learn what that person was doing to me in the half guard, so that I would be able to do it to people, or I would be able to do it or mimic it, and then I would figure out counters based on what I had learned or what I was able to kind of dissect and analyze and teach. So I would learn two things, right? Not just how to do the technique that was done to me, but then also how to counter the technique that was done to me. And in competitions, you go out and you get armbarred, and you realize, oh my gosh, I was leaving my arms exposed all the time. You may not ever have that experience in training for whatever reason, but that happens to you once in a competition. Maybe it was just luck. It'll never happen to you again, or hopefully you'll at least be a little more aware if it's going to happen to you again. And I think that having done that in competition, it gave me the opportunity, having done a lot of competitions, when I would lose and even when I would win, maybe I had a close battle and I would have to analyze what it was that made the match so close. And now I realize that's a really important skill, because the more you're able to analyze the situation, the more you're able to realize where you lost. You're more able to realize how you won, and you begin to understand yourself better. And in understanding yourself better, you're able to move, and you're able to avoid situations that you shouldn't be in, and you're able to put yourself in situations that you constantly want to be in, to score, to get the submission, to get the win. And I think that kind of self-awareness, being a black belt or getting your black belt, has a big self-awareness factor. And I think so. These are all technical things, but I think in becoming a black belt, maybe the most important thing is responsibility. You have, as a black belt, you have the responsibility to lead. And it's not just to be a leader, in jiu-jitsu, but it also has to do with being a leader in your life off the mat. And I'm not talking about being, a guru and teaching people about life lessons. I'm just talking about being a good example. Like my teachers have been to me. Being a good example in a way that, teaches people how to work hard. Being a good example, teaching people about persistence and patience and consistency. There's responsibility there. There's obviously the responsibility to teach good technique, right? To make sure you're not misleading people in jiu-jitsu. You have the responsibility to show, if you're going to teach self-defense, you think through self-defense and you give it your best. I think those are all, important responsibilities of a black belt. And I noticed immediately, I didn't think I got any better as a technique. My technique didn't change. me as a person didn't change when I changed my belt from a brown belt to black belt, but very quickly I realized um, I had more responsibility. People looked at me differently. People talked to me differently. In most jiu-jitsu schools, people will call you, they call you professor, or you go from being called a coach to being called a professor. Um, so all of a sudden, people that I don't know are calling me professor, and I realized, wow, just because I have a different color belt, I have more responsibility. It doesn't matter if I've known the person for a long time or not. I have more responsibility with my actions, not just jiu-jitsu, but my actions off the mat. And so I think understanding that, being able to understand that, is also an important part of becoming or being a black belt, and being acknowledged by your teacher. That you're ready for the responsibility. You're ready to handle that responsibility. I think that's a big part. I could just be making it up, maybe not, but I think most instructors kind of look at it like that. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. If I do, I will definitely post it. It's hard for me to go back and think what I had just said, but just as a quick recap, things that I think, going backwards: responsibility, being able to take on more responsibility, being able to visualize. My visualization, I think, helped a lot. Using my technique as opposed to strength and conditioning. It wasn't about a game of strength and conditioning. It was a game of technique. So I would minimize speed, minimize my strength or power in training. Competition was a whole different story, but in competition, that was my focus. My focus was to use the technique that I learned that day. The visualization, I think that was a big thing. Recalling helped with my recall of the technique, and also the retention of the technique. And then really being lucky, having the luck to have good instructors that cared about my learning, that cared about, that really gave it their best, without holding anything back. They wanted me to become better than they were at that time, and I think I'm very, very lucky with having had that. I'll try and keep sharing with you guys. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. I love to help you in any way I can.